Hi there, I'm Isan Ali A. Shaw, and you're watching me on YouTube and Facebook Live. It's the sixth and final episode of Globalization and History of Globalization and Global Market. If you remember, we started our journey about ancient globalization, Alexander the Great, ancient Greek and Romans. In the second episode, we focused on uh, the wars in the Middle Ages, the whole wars, overview of the Middle Ages. In the third episode, we discussed about the Mongolian Empire and the Viking Empire, that the Vikings Empire was never finished. It actually became Russia, Rus. And the Mongolian Empire was actually, they were the paid mercenaries of the Chinese Empire. And in the fourth episode, we we covered the Renaissance and Reformation period, and we have established in our discussion that it was actually the Renaissance period was actually the foundation time of the secret societies. And last week in the fifth episode, we discussed about the industrialization, discovery of oil and many other minerals, and how secret societies were working in the background. And today we are going to focus on the whole 20th century, First World War, Second World War, and the core period of Cold War, and what was going on behind the scene, and how the whole 20th century reshaped our modern world, or the modern globalization. And my guest is Edward Konowicz.
Yeah, hi, Asan Ali. How are you?
Hi, Ed. How are you?
I'm tired. I had to do a lot of study to get to the bottom of World War One, and
You're
I don't
right.
know whether we'll get to World War Two because World War One is
It's
quite a
very.
task.
You're right. There were so many things uh, to cover in this in the 20th century, especially the influenza and the Ottoman Empire, the German, French, and Americans, and how the influenza actually killed more people than the whole war, the First World War.
Yeah, well, disease did. It's like
Hmm.
today, a lot of people are dying from toxic problems, and it's
Hmm.
all being called COVID-19. During
Hmm.
World War One, people were dying from trench mouth, from typhoid fever, from
Hmm.
living in trenches. I mean,
Hmm.
living totally unsanitary conditions for weeks and months. They were dying from disease, and the public was supposed to just see it as the Spanish flu.
Hmm.
So we have the same thing today. We have a toxic environment,
Hmm.
and people are dying from toxic damage,
Hmm.
and it's supposed to be attributed to a virus, not through industrial negligence.
Hmm.
So, but World War One was the
Hmm.
change of empires.
Hmm.
We actually have, I think, four empires that collapsed.
Yes.
We have the Austrian Hungary Empire
Hmm.
collapsed. Ottoman Empire about 5 years later collapsed.
Hmm.
The Chinese Empire under the
Hmm.
Qing
Okay.
dynasty collapsed,
Hmm.
and the Russian Empire collapsed,
Hmm.
which was is no good no longer be under a czar.
Hmm.
So, and the one empire that expanded was Britain or England. Britain and
Hmm.
England expanded massively, and the issue was this, the second industrial revolution, which was
Mm-hmm.
the first industrial revolution was based on coal,
Mm-hmm.
and the second industrial revolution was
Was
based on
based on
oil.
oil or.
And that's even World War II. The Britain and others were maneuvering to control the oil fields. The
Mm-hmm.
same with Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And so the previous industrial revolution did not hit China. China remained a cottage industry. And at
Mm-hmm.
that point, Britain, France, and Germany were intruding on China. And in
Mm-hmm.
World War One, Japan attacked Germany, declared war on Germany. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't study all of history, and then when you're older, you have more intelligence and experience and study skills. But
Mm-hmm.
basically, Tsingtao, which was on the Yellow Sea, which is the large bay between South Korea and China, had
Mm-hmm.
major ports. And
Mm-hmm.
Manchuria, which gave birth to the Qing dynasty, was
Mm-hmm.
there with a lot of mineral reserves, iron, uranium, other stuff. And Japan wanted part of that. So Japan acted as a protector of China because China did not have the military strength that Japan did. It declared
Mm-hmm.
in World War One war against Germany and got Germany out of Tsingtao. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and
So,
China,
was the First World War was about the controlling the natural resources?
yes, it was a further development of colonialism or
Mm-hmm.
imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
And
Or picking out the
Japan,
competition part.
Japan, yeah, Japan was rising to be
Mm-hmm.
another England,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of European history is the focus, but I don't think Europe was the focus of
Mm-hmm.
World War One.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
World War.
there was trench warfare,
Mm-hmm.
and actually up to 100,000 Chinese and another like 100,000 East Indian, India workers
Mm-hmm.
were sent to Europe to dig the trenches to manufacture the tanks and shells. Um, China and India supplied Russia and Britain, particularly, with laborers and were a
Mm-hmm.
major part of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And
India was
particularly,
the India was the major contributor in the
yeah,
First World War. I think it also India also contributed in the Second World War as well.
yeah. And we also had New Zealand and
And
Australia was
Australian.
called
Yeah.
called Anzac. So we
Mm-hmm.
get too focused on the war between France and Germany
Mm-hmm.
when really it was England extending to control the Middle East oil supplies.
Mm-hmm. And
And
there comes the uh, globally.
yeah, this was globalism was now World War One put England and the United States as the major globalists.
Mm-hmm.
And to really understand that, and I sent you a link on it. It's a long link, the
It's a
the
very
the,
long link.
the very long study, and I had to
Mm-hmm.
read that and others. Gallipoli,
Mm-hmm.
which was really Istanbul. It was
Mm-hmm.
a battle for control of the old Byzantine Empire, the Constantinople, which had become the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, I think the purpose of globally was to break the Ottoman Empire, so to weaken the Ottoman Empire and take over the oil supply in the Middle East.
Yes, by installing the Hashemite dynasties,
Mm-hmm.
particularly King Faisal,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
then
Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
yeah, and then I forget the other one. I think it was Abdullah Transjordan, which was
Yeah,
Jordan
King.
was larger.
Yeah, Hussein, I think. Yeah.
And I do need to look that up. Let me see if, well, it's, there's one article, and let me
Mm-hmm.
see if I can. I'm going to paste this link because I think this is a really good thing for people to read.
Okay.
Um, and it's a lot. I mean, I don't have it all memorized. I came to a
Mm-hmm.
lot of interesting conclusions, and I
Mm-hmm.
want to just check that. And people have to forgive me. I'm overloaded because the real history is um, is hidden.
Yeah. And
And not
we have got a comment from Sandra, and you can read it here on the
yes, well,
screen.
peace, love, and light. It's
Yeah.
kind of important to see that we the people have to be
Mm-hmm.
aware of the cruelty of our leaders
Yes.
because over 100 million people died in World War I.
Yes, indeed.
And in the battle over Turkey or Istanbul or the Ottoman Empire, there
Mm-hmm.
was about 200 to 400,000 casualties on each side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's about 1 million people died
Mm-hmm.
in the battle for controlling Istanbul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And this was huge. I mean, let me, Mika, I want to verify the name of the Transjordan dynasty, the Hashemite king.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Abdullah. It was
Yeah.
Abdullah and
Okay.
Faisal and Abdullah. And
Mm-hmm.
basically, Britain decided to install their own kings in the Middle East. And what
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence of Arabia was about is a British intelligence officer
Mm-hmm.
who
Yeah. It's
organized an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire because the Ottoman Empire were controlled by Turks, not Arabs.
I think he was called Lawrence of Arabia. I think there
Yeah,
was also a
T.
movie.
T. Yeah, T. E. Lawrence.
Yeah, T. Lawrence.
And
He was a secret agent.
the terrible thing was Britain was wanting to put into power horrible monarchies,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would kill them supposedly. It's
Mm-hmm.
like King Faisal. He
Mm-hmm.
was only 48. He went for a medical checkup in Switzerland. 48 years of age, he goes for a medical checkup and dies in the medical checkup.
Mm-hmm.
So we're dealing with the now the Ottomans were brutal. The
Mm-hmm.
Ottomans committed genocide against the Armenians. Like a
Mm-hmm.
million people were killed, women and children.
Mm-hmm.
Many
Mm-hmm.
starved, raped.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that was the same as World War II with the Gypsies and the Jews and the communists.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the Ottoman Empire was under attack. And
Mm-hmm.
so anyone who was not Islamic or aligned with the Ottoman Empire was seen as an enemy.
Yes.
And both sides were brutal. I mean, later,
Mm-hmm.
even Britain used poison gas in the Palestinian and other areas of the war.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I think.
we're supposed to come to a conclusion. Britain is this human rights freedom country, and it's finally being revealed. Britain is one of the most totalitarian states in the world.
I think the same thing happened after the Second World War, and everyone and anyone who disagreed with the democratic system of government, who was labeled as communist or socialist, and socialist was labeled as something horrible. And the same thing happened in the First World War. That what Ottoman Empire was doing. Anyone who wasn't Islamic was killed.
There was atrocities on both sides.
Yes,
You
of
know,
course.
we're supposed to see the victors as heroes,
Yes.
but in reading the Gallipoli, which
Mm-hmm.
was really the war for Turkey,
Mm-hmm.
um, soldiers ran out of bullets, and the Ottoman Empire said, "You're not ordered to fight; you're ordered to die." They were
Mm-hmm.
supposed to just go ahead and charge and to their deaths. and
Mhm.
kill as many um, whoever they were fighting. Now they were fighting the Russians, the
Mhm.
British, the French, the New
Mhm.
Zealands, New
Australian.
Zealand, Australians,
Mhm.
the Indians.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, I don't think the major battle of World War One was in
In the
Europe.
Europe. Mhm.
I think the major battle was in Gallipoli, which is
Yes.
really Turkey. They don't want to say
Mhm.
Turkey or the Ottoman Empire. So who's going to know what Gallipoli is? I don't even know
Mhm.
what Gallipoli is. So
Okay.
there was a battle for the control of the Dardanelles, which is the strait from the Mediterranean to the
Mhm.
Black Sea, which was supplying Russia.
Mhm.
The, the theme that we get in World War One, which was already emerging earlier, was the other countries would change allegiance.
Mhm. Mhm.
And the reason they would change allegiance, they would all try to get together to attack the one that was growing too big. If one
Mhm.
country, Austria Hungary, or Russia, or the Ottoman Empire, whatever empire was growing too big, except Britain was able to basically keep other countries from ganging up on them. But
Mhm.
basically, the Austrian Hungarian Empire, Hungary, would unite with Germany, and Italy united with them in World War II. It did in World War One, but it switched sides.
Mhm.
So it's very common for countries to switch sides against what they saw as the growing empire that had to be contained.
Mhm.
But what we see here in World War One and Two is the second industrial revolution, which was based on oil, which would be cars and tanks, and the
Mhm.
soldiers were still stuck in trenches,
Mhm.
you know, dirt dug into the ground with poison gas
Mhm.
and biological weapons, that there was more people being killed by biological warfare than by
Yeah.
bullets.
Yes, and also
And
the
the
influenza.
lie, yeah, the
Mhm.
lie today is there's no biological warfare, it's just viruses.
Mhm.
It's the same thing today.
Yeah.
People are dying from many lung diseases,
Mhm.
particularly radioactive poisoning
Mhm.
and chromium 6, fluoride. There's a lot of toxins that people are being,
Exposed to exposed.
exposed to or subjected to. And it's all
Mhm.
supposed to be COVID 19. Well, during World War One,
Mhm.
millions of people were dying from the rotten military conditions and close quarters, lack of sanitation, lack of clean water, dead bodies around. I mean,
Mhm.
tons of dead bodies would be floating by soldiers in rain.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they were dying of diseases like typhoid, but the public
Mhm.
was supposed to think it was Spanish flu. Just like today,
Mhm.
as more and more people die from the toxic pollution, we're supposed to see it as COVID 19. Same thing in World War One, which is
Mhm.
history repeats itself for those who
Mhm.
don't study history.
Mhm.
But getting back to it, Asia was involved.
Mhm.
This
So we
this
have
was
got we have got a comment from Sandra. Gallipoli
yeah.
was.
Sandra says, yeah, we Gallipoli was the first. I've
Mhm.
heard it before. I said, well, where the heck is Gallipoli? But then when you realize it's the Ottoman Empire, you say, well, this is huge.
Mhm.
Particularly when you realize Lawrence of Arabia was about turning the Arabs against the
Mhm.
Turks, and then
Mhm.
Britain installing kings and being the kingmaster of the
Mhm.
Middle East to control the oil.
Mhm.
And once you understand this is the second industrial revolution would be based on oil and gasoline,
Mhm.
then you World War One makes sense that people are moving to control the oil, but the European propaganda has you focused on Europe instead of the Middle East, where the
Mhm.
question of controlling the oil is.
Mhm.
So, and that was quite a revelation to me because, I'm first focused on the trench warfare and Britain and troops and
Mhm.
Russia. And then I come across the Gallipoli and then
Mhm.
the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which is 5 years later, about 1922.
Yes.
And what it was the fall of was imperialism was unified with religion. So
Mhm.
Turkey became a more secular state under Ataturk. It
Mhm.
was the rise, basically, I think, of the secret societies, which is we have the mercantilist class that grew out of the retired or non deployed soldiers who were the engineers. Soldiers are
Mhm.
engineers. They build the
The
weapons and
British.
maintain them, move the supplies, build the siege towers. So they became the tradesmen or guildsmen, and they unified. And they
Mhm.
unified secret societies and became bankers in order to
Mhm.
secure the trade. And the monarchy was more interested in their totalitarian power. So at times they would kill the secret societies and tradesmen. But
Mhm.
eventually the secret societies, like in the United States, emerged with the front, the political front or propaganda of a democracy.
Mhm.
But this was overthrowing the monarchies like the Tsar of Russia, the Austrian Hungary emperor,
Mhm.
the the caliphate or sultan of or whoever controlled the Ottoman
Yeah.
Empire.
Yeah.
So so
Sultan.
so
Sultan.
Sultan. So whoever controlled these empires were being resisted by the
Mhm.
engineers who had more skills,
Mhm.
and
What do
we
you
see
think?
that
What do you
particularly.
What do you think about the clash of two systems, democratic imperialism, totalitarianism, or with democracy? Do you see any link among them, or it was also just a cover story?
Well, most of that's a cover story. People have no power. I mean, that's
Yes.
just a lie. That was a lie perpetrated
Hmm.
um, by propaganda. We
Hmm.
see the power move from monarchies to military takeovers.
Hmm.
It was a military takeover in Russia.
Hmm.
The military rebelled because in World War One, the Germans broke the code of the Russian army and knew exactly what the Russian army was doing.
Hmm.
So the Russian army wanted more competent officers. And
Hmm.
when these so called secular powers like Stalin and
Hmm.
Hitler took power, they purged the military, killing
Hmm.
up to 95% of the officers.
Hmm.
I mean, just think about that. 95% of the officers were killed in purges. The US is going through a purge right now, a neoliberal purge.
Hmm.
And so World War One sets the stage, even with the diseases, blaming the Spanish flu for other diseases, sets the stage for what we're experiencing today. But I don't want to, that's for our next show, which is to deal with the third industrial revolution, which was
Hmm.
aluminum and
Hmm.
nuclear power. And of course,
Hmm.
nuclear power failed. I need to say
Okay.
that. Nuclear power is failing.
Okay. It's going to be the next episode about globalization, the
Yes,
end of globalization. Okay.
but the
But
key here, which both the Russia and Britain understood with the second industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution was about textiles, coal,
mhm,
and
yeah,
steel,
yes.
and it produced the railroad.
Hmm.
The second industrial revolution was really based on the extension of the railroad. So
Yes.
Russia became a power because it created the Trans Siberian Railroad from all
Hmm.
the way from Europe all the way to
to Asia or
Beijing,
mhm,
Asia, Vladivostok, right
mhm,
to the coast. So it was able to have influence over parts of China and Japan. And China were ready to go to war with Russia because Russia was in, invading their territory because of the
mhm,
power of supplying troops with the railroad.
mhm,
So, and Britain understood this. Britain came into not only Africa, North, North Africa, and the Middle East, and built railroads,
mhm,
which was the focus of conquest now turned to the railroad. Before it was naval.
mhm,
This is probably why Britain lost the attack on Gallipoli or Turkey,
mhm,
is they saw it as a naval battle. They sent a
mhm,
lot of ships.
mhm,
And the Germans helped with a few planes that were used more for observation. And I think some might have been using torpedoes. But just think about the Ottoman Empire with a limited industrial base held off Russia, India, New Zealand, Australia,
British
British,
and
France,
yes, the whole
the,
world, the
the
whole
whole
world was
world. The
yes,
Ottoman
the,
Empire held off practically the whole world.
yes,
So we're dealing with a skill of fighting only the Vietnamese. The Vietnamese
mhm,
defeated the Chinese, they
mhm,
defeated the French, they defeated the Americans. We're,
mhm,
we're dealing with um, a fighting skill almost
mhm,
unsurpassed that
mhm,
the Ottoman Empire could withhold, you know, and hold their land against such a huge onslaught. But they
mhm,
fell from their own empire because what Britain then did was divide and conquer.
mhm,
You had Lawrence of Arabia turn the Arab Islamic peoples against the Turks.
mhm,
So that is sort of the summary of World War One, which was the
mhm,
fall of the Ottoman Empire, which happened about 5 years later, the
mhm.
fall of the Austrian Hungary
Hungary,
Empire, the fall of the
all of
Russian
Russian
imperialism, the Tsar,
mhm,
and the fall of the Chink and
dynasty.
dynasty.
Mhm,
And it was because many of them had not developed the railroad.
mhm.
That's just
The
how
transportation. They didn't
the
have the
transportation
infrastructure.
link, right?
Mhm,
They didn't have the land transportation. I mean, if you go back 1,000 years, you
mhm,
know, or you don't have to go back quite 1,000, but to
mhm,
Genghis Khan,
mhm.
they were securing the Silk Road. They were securing roads,
Yes, I think
but the roads,
we discussed it in the second episode, in the second or third episode about when we were focusing on the Viking Empire and the Mongolian Empire, that the Mongolian were the paid mercenaries of Chinese to protect the Silk Road.
yeah. And I sent you that link on China. China
Yes.
tried just a little bit before Columbus to develop a navy and a
Mm-hmm,
merchant marine, and they decided it wasn't worth it. So
mm-hmm,
the first stage of globalization, which was from in the Renaissance and the colonial period, was
mm-hmm,
naval power. What was connecting trade and increasing technology, particularly the factory or the mill. Military is mill for factory,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
is naval power because you couldn't build a big ship by yourself. You needed a group of people.
yes.
So
And
naval power.
globalization, in other words, globalization is all about, has always all about the engineering skill.
Right. Where was the and the naval power was that, and that's why China took
Hmm.
almost 200 years to undergo industrial revolution. They didn't have the naval power. They skipped
Hmm.
that. And
Hmm.
then what Japan initiated, because Japan was aware of this, was railroads.
Hmm.
The railway became the new technology to secure the transportation of goods, particularly coal, iron,
Hmm.
oil, which was coming.
Hmm.
and food and clothing. The
Mhm.
first industrial revolution was textiles.
Mhm.
The second industrial revolution was more military technology like battleships and
Guns,
and guns,
weapons.
weaponry, and
Mhm.
factories that would operate on coal
Mhm.
and stuff. And the oil came around World War One, which Britain was more aware of than anyone. And Britain basically maneuvered World War One to get control over the Middle East oil fields.
Mhm.
And we have this incredible battle at Turkey called Gallipoli, which is bypassed for the gruesome war in Europe. And the
Mhm.
big lie is, and it's going on today,
Mhm.
oh, people are being killed by a virus. No, that's not true.
Mhm.
Being killed by rotten, toxic conditions. In
Mhm.
World War One, the troops were in literally sewage,
Mhm.
and dead bodies floating around. Even in Turkey, dead
Mhm.
bodies would be all over the field. There wasn't time to bury people. The dead bodies would be rotten. Everyone was getting disease.
Mhm.
And historically we're supposed to, if we don't study, we're supposed to be told it was the Spanish flu. And it wasn't. They didn't have tests for viruses.
Mhm.
They didn't even have a test for us. How did they know it was the Spanish flu?
Yes.
So now we got a phony test, the PCR test,
Mhm.
that's not
We have got a.
reliable at all. And
Mhm.
we got the same phenomenon, except they pretend there's a test.
Mhm.
And for example, the Indian Point nuclear reactor above New York City broke down and melted, not melted, but it was contaminating the environment, radioactive water, and had to be shut down. But they don't
Mhm.
tell that to the public.
Mhm.
It's all COVID-19.
Mhm.
Fukushima has contaminated the west coast of the United States, but they don't say people are dying from radioactive contamination. It's COVID-19. This happened during World War One to blame
Mhm.
people's deaths on a virus. And
Mhm.
World War One sets the stage for modern globalization, which is using naval power and railroads to to
For
transport
weaponry.
goods. And
Mhm.
Britain was very skilled. Britain engineers are excellent.
Mhm.
Put this back in my ears. Hold on a second. Um,
Okay.
so Britain, um, they were brilliant. They're some of the best engineers.
Mhm.
And but Russia and United States, made a big difference. The United States sent, I think, 1 million troops to World War One. So
Mhm.
basically, Germany had to surrender because the influx of troops from the colonial power of Britain. Now, my thesis, and
Mhm.
it's been my thesis for 30 years, is
Okay,
Britain.
we have got a comment from Sandra, and she says exactly how did they know it was Spanish flu?
Yeah, they did
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
It's,
There was no
it,
laboratory, there was no test, there was nothing. Mhm.
yeah. So, but we believe this. People believe
Yeah.
what they're taught on TV.
Mhm. Yes, it's a consistent process. You have to tell the lies until people start believing it. You
Yeah,
have
they
to
just repeat
consistent.
it over and over again.
Yes.
And studying history, it's there in history. I mean, you can find it
Mhm.
in Wikipedia. I found
Mhm.
other good sources like that one I posted here is an excellent source. And I
Mhm.
think people should read it because the people who were victims were
Mhm.
Islamic people. Millions of Islamic people in the
Mhm.
last 40 years have been driven homeless by
Mhm.
imperialistic wars,
Mhm.
by putting dictators like Saddam Hussein in power.
Mhm.
And
In the Middle East.
yeah, and the Middle East has been resorting to religion as their mind control in order to keep the Westerners out, but it doesn't work. The Saudis are like the right hand of the American and British policy.
Mhm. I
So
think
so the people have
all
been,
of the Middle Eastern countries, all of the Middle Eastern countries, they have been the right hand of the Western.
imperialism. The West has been able to turn the Arab and Persian peoples against each other.
Mhm,
And so they foster this Shiite versus Sunni conflict.
mhm,
And millions of people are suffering like they were during World War One from
mhm,
the globalization.
mhm,
And the globalization today, because people are beginning to realize that. They're saying this
mhm,
war is ridiculous. We're being turned against each other. We're
mhm,
being turned to kill each other.
mhm,
And so what they're resorting to is chemical biological warfare,
mhm.
which is King Faisal I was killed by doctors in Switzerland. The doctors are being used for the biological warfare.
Okay. We
And
have got another comment from Sandra. He says, I really enjoyed.
yeah, and she would get a CD if possible. She enjoys the series. Yeah,
Okay, we have. Okay.
Asan and I have spent a lot of time, and we're not experts. In fact,
Yes.
we're purely amateurs, but we
Mhm,
actually put our academic skills
mhm.
on.
I'll share the link with you in the comment after finishing our discussion.
And it's been a lot of work for me because I'm, my degree is in computer technology, not in history. So I
Mm-hmm.
had to
So,
do a lot of scrambling.
mm-hmm.
And
And
there's some
mine.
good historians.
Mm-hmm.
There's some good historians you can read, but I think few of them, very
Mm-hmm.
few summarize it as well as I do. Which is
Mm-hmm.
I'm not looking to repeat what I'm reading. I'm looking, okay, what's really going on here?
Mm-hmm.
What's the issue? Like oil in the Middle East, and they
Mm-hmm.
hide it because the oil isn't publicly announced until about 10 years after World War One.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue is hidden. And you say, well, why is Britain in the Middle East? And then you see King Faisal, you see the Mossadegh being overthrown in Iran.
Mm-hmm.
You see the Jordan and Syria become issues, Libya, and then you
Yeah,
realize
Syria.
it's oil. These are the oil wars, and they
Mm-hmm.
started in World War One, and it was started by dividing the people of the Middle East so they kill each other. Because
Mm-hmm.
what's amazing with Gallipoli, the West with its millions of troops, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
England, France,
Mm-hmm.
um, India, uh,
Okay.
New Zealand, Australia,
Mm-hmm.
Russia,
Mm-hmm.
they couldn't defeat the Middle East
Mm-hmm.
people until they
Mm-hmm.
divided them against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where civilization began in the Middle East, and I'm not promoting the Middle East, I think the religion has become very oppressive, very damaging to human rights. But the people there have been damaged by imperialistic countries, particularly France, England, or Britain, and the US, and turned against each other. So they didn't progress. Any type of real democracy or progressivism is attacked. Religious
Mm-hmm.
fanatics and terrorists are funded and trained.
Yes, and
Now,
I live in one of the country, and I see the tyranny uh, uh, of religion and being practiced all around me.
yeah, and the tyranny of drones and, and,
Mhm,
and, and missiles, the US feels they can bomb anyone they want.
mhm,
And now the people of the United States and England and Britain are experiencing the tyranny of their leaders.
mhm,
We're in lockdowns. We're supposed to wear masks. We're supposed to
mhm.
be
Yes.
tested. We're living now in the United States and in Britain, we're living under a medical police state. We're living
Yeah.
under dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
So the tyranny that they did to the people of the Middle East, divide and conquering them, is
Mm-hmm.
now
Really didn't
um,
work.
now being done to our own people
Mm-hmm.
in the name of medicine, like the
Yes.
Spanish flu. So
Yes.
World War One is critical to understand what's going on today, which is the two major imperialist powers
Mm-hmm.
became Britain and United States, and they don't believe in human rights.
Yes.
They're busy trying to destroy them, and they're
Mm-hmm.
busy sponsoring dictators and monarchies that would destroy human rights. And the
Yes.
people of the world's got to need to get smart. They need to study history.
Yes. And
And
I think the whole divide and conquer thing, and the race over the race to control over the natural resources like oil and gas in the Middle East, and it continued the whole 20th century even today.
yeah, the big issue which is hidden today is pipelines, where there's going to
Yes.
be pipelines through Turkey or Syria
Hmm.
or or through Israel. Where's the pipelines going to go, and where are the ships going to be loaded? Particularly now that nuclear energy really has failed. China and Russia still are investing in nuclear energy, but
Hmm.
United States, France, Germany, they
Hmm.
realize it, and Italy, they realize it's a dead end because of the toxic pollution. Too many
Hmm.
people have died because of the
Hmm.
radioactive dumping, and that's hidden totally. I have a
Hmm.
friend on Facebook whose home and neighborhood has been destroyed in St. Louis, a major city of the United States, by
Hmm.
radioactive dumping in a
Hmm.
suburb of St. Louis.
Hmm. And we have got a comment from Sandra again, and here you go.
Yeah, World War One is scanned over and not studied in depth. And it's hard
Yes.
because when you go study it, it's always about battles, number of
Hmm.
casualties, how many
Hmm.
tanks, how many submarines, how many destroyers, how many
Hmm.
battleships, how many planes. It's not
Hmm.
about where's the oil. It's not about where's the steel. It's not about who is going to control the the third world nations.
Hmm. And most importantly, it was the First World War in the mainstream history. It's all focused on the Europe.
Yeah, all focused on Europe, so you miss the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And
Show
and we
one side of the picture so people couldn't see the other, and that's how the propaganda works.
yeah, it's basically a distraction. Propaganda
Hmm.
is to distract people,
Hmm.
and which is the thing in life. And we'll get into this when we get into spiritual topics because we're
Okay.
headed. But
Hmm.
we still have about two more sessions in globalization. We got World War II,
Hmm.
and then the undeclared World War III that's now going on. So I
Okay.
think I can't I don't want to cover World War II in this
Hmm.
session. We're already almost three quarters through it. But
Hmm.
the really important point here is human beings are being divided and conquered, that those in
Hmm.
power are turning people against each other. And today, of
Yes.
course, with medicine, the debate over wearing a mask or the vaccines that are only being tested by the companies manufacturing them, where any debate is being purged. We're now having a purge going on like Stalin and Hitler did. And the
Hmm.
United
Just
States is
like
being done by
just like
neoliberals.
tech companies are doing it right now in these days.
Yes,
If you disagree with them, they will label you as you're doing it against the community standard. So they will block you. They will block your feed and remove your posts and your content
well, they will try.
from the
They
internet.
will try.
Yes.
They
Yes.
first blocked the controlled oppositions, which are the agents. It's
Hmm.
so like the communist revolution. George Orwell's The animal farm where the pigs take over the farm and make it worse.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not that negative towards communism because I think
Mhm.
it had a few good points, but
Mhm.
it was terror. There was a lot of terrorism done and purges done, particularly by Stalin. It mediated, just like democracy mediated in the United States with civil rights.
Mhm.
But the civil rights was undermined by the war on drugs, which is
Mhm.
instead of black people being enslaved on plantations, they're now enslaved in prisons.
Mhm.
So the imperialism took a different form, which was using medicine and the courts. The
Mhm.
courts are the battlefield today frequently
Mhm.
because most people are nonviolent. And this is the
Mhm.
propaganda in the United States claiming the protesters in DC were violent insurrectionists. And most of
Mhm.
them were just carrying signs. Most of them were just protesting. They had no guns.
Mhm.
Can't have an insurrection by
Mhm.
people with signs. It's totally absurd. So we have a purge going on. That's
Mhm.
why it's
It's an.
important to understand history because we want
Mhm.
to avoid another world war. If we
Mhm.
let those people in power just rule,
Mhm.
without condemning their crime, they're going to bring us another world war with not hundreds of millions dying like in one and two, with billions
Mhm.
of people dying. If we let the rulers of the world continue, we'll have a nuclear war.
That's how I think the whole propaganda works is to divide and conquer, turn people against one another so they are divided. Once they are divided, then it's easier to control. Only show them one side of the picture, and and
Yes, so
yeah.
it was the Ottoman Turks against the Arabs, and now
Mhm.
it's the Shiite against the Sunni.
Mhm.
So it's Saudi Arabia and Yemen. It's
Mhm.
divide and conquer the people of the Middle East by getting them to kill each other.
Mhm.
So the issue is
Mhm.
it's based on technology.
Mhm.
The mad scientist. This is what Shelley wrote about in Frankenstein's monster, which is Dr.
Mhm.
Frankenstein put a bunch of dead parts together to get a monster. And people are too enamored of the technocrats, which is the secret societies, took
Mhm.
control of the sciences and the corporations, and now they're
Mhm.
ruling as as tyrannical as the emperors and kings.
Mhm.
So instead of Tsar Alexander, we
Mhm.
have Bill Gates.
Mhm.
We have these CEOs pretending to be saints through philanthropy, imposing tyranny on people, taking away their human rights of choice in medical care, taking
Mhm.
away their economic choice by closing small businesses.
Mhm.
So we now have not the rule of imperialist families,
Mhm.
or dynasties. We have the
Mhm.
rule of technocrats, corporations that are
Mhm.
controlling the propaganda and not giving consumers choice.
Yes, freedom of speech is under attack. People don't have choices, high level of surveillance, and now you have to wear masks. What the heck is going on?
Yeah, we're risking our lives talking about it.
Mhm.
We and others are risking our lives, but we rather risk our lives and stop a World War III from happening and
Mhm.
stop the carnage of people around the world being destroyed by these technocrats.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, they've created enough chaos and they're in control of the chaos, so now they can use their controlled opposition
Yes.
to create a new tyrannical order.
Yes.
And they're very skilled at this.
Yes. It's like this set up a problem. Yes, exactly. You have to create a problem, then to show them what is the solution. That's how the propaganda works.
Yeah, it's to remove independent thinking. The
Yes.
real and this is what they're losing as religion is taking a second place. The
Mhm.
popes and the clerics
Mhm.
and the the monks, they used to insist this is what you have to believe is right and wrong, and you
Mhm,
cannot think on your own. You were not allowed to make the choice of what is right and wrong. You were supposed to be told. And these
mhm,
presidents, they really don't have the moral stature. They're so
mhm,
creepy and
mhm,
unethical in their lives. They don't have the moral stature to pretend that they're
mhm,
telling people what is loving and what is wrong. They're trying to. United
mhm,
States are trying to have a purge that if you don't go along with the vaccines and the masks, you're unscientific, you're selfish, you're self-centered. They're trying to
mhm,
portray you as a heretic, which
mhm.
was, in the dark ages, they would burn you at the stake. Today, they fire you from a job.
Uh,
If you're a heretic
yeah,
today, you're not burnt at the stake, you're fired from your job.
yeah, it's the same thing. Cut off
This
your
is
all of your earning and income status. You are already dead in the society.
right.
Your own family will kick you
Well,
out.
this is the case with the Middle East. Instead of like
Mhm,
World War I, where there was
mhm,
concentration camps,
mhm,
you have an open air concentration camp, which is refugees, people who are forced to migrate through deserts, to
mhm,
force on these long marches, and they die. So
mhm.
you have an open air concentration camp. That's the modern strategy, is to drive millions of people homeless and let them die,
Yes.
usually from poor sanitation. So
Mhm,
as people are dying from a lack of sanitation, a lack of good food, a lack of a shelter, it's no people are dying from COVID-19. They're dying from the Spanish flu,
yes. It's all a
and
cover story.
and the historians need to be addressing this because I'm not a historian. I
Yes.
mean, I studied about 15, 20 hours for this
Mhm,
particular thing. And
mhm,
and I threw out a lot of the details. I'm not going to go over the naval battles. I'm not going to
mhm,
go over the moving of the front lines back and forth. I'm going to
mhm,
talk about how it was set up and how empires fell and how Britain and the United States consolidated power and got control over the Middle East oil supplies.
mhm,
And then how Russia was contained and
mhm,
how Russia expanded
mhm.
itself because of the use of a railroad, and
Yes. And
how
became a
Britain
Soviet
ex,
Union.
yeah, how Britain expanded itself with the use of the railroad, which is
Mhm,
your transportation used to be naval, and
mhm,
this is why China couldn't get into globalization until about 50 years ago,
mhm,
because China didn't develop a naval transportation system.
mhm,
And the Russia got influenced just into Mongolia, Manchuria, and other places because it built the railroad. And what
mhm,
was the competitor to Russia was Japan, because Japan then went into China and South Korea and built the railroads.
mhm.
But today, it's mostly information control. It's
Yes.
mind control, which is the number one resource. Is not oil; it's people's thinking.
Yes.
We don't. That doesn't emerge in World War I. That
Mhm,
emerges in World War II and afterwards. The control
mhm,
over people's thinking
mhm,
is more recent resource.
mhm.
Now the
I
Roman
think
Empire knew that. That's why the
I think
Roman
that
Empire.
that has always been the case. Control the minds of people. Once you are successfully controlling the minds of people, then you can lead them whatever you want to do. If you tell them about killing, you can make them believe that killing is right. That's what happened in the Middle Ages, and that's what happened in the First World War and the Second World War.
Yeah, but the issue, and this is a minor, but I agree with what you said.
Hmm.
The issue was the mind control was in temples, mosques, and
Hmm.
churches. And then we
Hmm.
have the printing press because
Hmm.
books were expensive. Books were like $20,000 a piece. And once
Hmm.
we had the printing press,
Hmm.
um, we had more mind control. And so
Yes.
we get the printing press, we start getting modern warfare, and
mhm,
then with telegraph, radio, and TV, which
mhm,
all of the leaders use, then we
mhm,
get more extensive mind control. Because what happens is people grow out of the earlier mind control. Europe grew out of the religious mind control.
mhm,
The Middle East didn't. The Middle East is still under religious mind control.
yeah, I think most of the Muslim countries are. They are still under the influence of. I think it's going to last around about 2 or 300 years more. We are still going to see a lot of.
Well, I don't know how much it's
Uh,
going to last because the mind control has so lowered people. The
mhm,
religious mind control has so lowered people. The West can
mhm.
just bomb and destroy people any place they want in the Middle East. They have no
Yes,
protection.
yes.
So all these countries can be destroyed because their mind control makes them
Mhm,
vulnerable.
mhm,
And people aren't realizing it. They're not
mhm.
realizing the mind control makes them more vulnerable.
Yes.
So the mind control in the West is not religious, it's medicine.
Mhm,
You don't have the bishop or the cardinal, you have the
mhm,
psychiatrist. And this
mhm,
began to emerge. Psychiatry began to emerge as a major player of mind control in World War One,
mhm,
particularly towards women, because
mhm,
the issue that develops in World War Two, and this is even the issue in World War One, is
mhm,
the rights of a woman. Women were treated as slaves for
mhm,
for the last like 1,000 or 2,000 years of history.
mhm,
And Britain was able to dominate because it had female monarchs
mhm,
and writers. Though it was still very dominated by males, the culture.
mhm.
Even today, the monarch of England is female.
Yes.
So this is a major issue. We see that with the Catholic Church. Only a
Mhm,
male can be a priest or a bishop or a cardinal. But the
mhm,
history says there was actually one pope that was female that
yes.
disguised herself as a male.
Mhm,
Um, the the question is one of human rights,
mhm,
and religion, medicine, and war, particularly, are used to remove human rights, which is you should have freedom of belief. No one should
mhm,
tell you what is right and wrong. You should be
mhm,
able to develop that. Now, what was used during World War One was war. War
mhm,
was used to control people's minds. You had to be on the side of your country, and if you weren't willing to fight and give your life, you were a traitor, or coward, or no good.
mhm,
So what we see is why World War One emerged. Religion failed to control people's minds.
mhm,
So to control people's mind, you needed patriotism.
mhm,
So the rise of nationalism, which which really was the result of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution produced more education, more engineering, more understanding of the nature of the earth, and less reliance on religion. And with that
mhm,
Industrial Revolution, the mind control of of religion was no longer
mhm,
as effective. So then we
mhm.
enter World War One, where war and
It's the
patriotism,
patriotism.
and so the democracies were using no longer monarchies and religion for
Mhm,
globalization. They were using war and patriotism to control people's minds.
mhm. So
And
I think
and
we okay. I think
I
we
think
have
we summarized World War One pretty well. I
yes,
mean, we didn't go
and
over all the details, but to
yes,
cover World War One in an hour and get to the
yes.
major conclusions, I think is pretty amazing.
Yes, and I think we have covered enough in our today's session. We started from World War One, the Ottoman Empire, and how the mainstream history is focused on the West and against Germany, Britain and Europe against and German again against Europe. Though they are not mainstream historian are not talking about what happened in globally and what happened in China and other parts of the world, that transportation was the key in the First World War. And I think we have covered enough in our today's discussion.
The
And if you have
next
any,
topic is going to be
is
World War II.
yes, World War II. If you have any question, please leave it in the comment box below, and I will answer it to you, and Ed will answer it to you as soon as he can. Thanks, and have a good night.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Okay.